The thing outside my window was running on 2 legs. I know how that sounds. I've driven US 491 through New Mexico maybe 60, 70 times over the past 9 years. Night hauls, mostly. Flagstaff to Shiprock, sometimes further up into Colorado. I know that road the way I know my own name. Every cattle guard, every broken mile marker, every stretch where the asphalt goes so flat and straight you start to wonder if the world just forgot to curve. I had never been afraid on that road. Not once. That changed on the night of October 14th, 2023. I was running a standard refrigerated load. Produce, mostly, lettuce and strawberries out of Yuma, headed to a distribution center in Farmington. I'd left Gallup around 1:40 a.m. No traffic. No radio worth listening to. Out there the signal goes thin and you get static. Or you get one of those AM stations playing old gospel music that makes the dark feel even darker. I had a thermos of coffee. A half-eaten gas station sandwich. The usual. Mile marker 62 is where I first noticed it. Not because I saw it. Because my dog started screaming. I should explain. I travel with a 4-year-old blue heeler named Cass. She's made this run with me maybe 30 times. Calm dog. Quiet dog. A dog that sleeps through way stations and air brakes and the occasional blown tire. I have never, in 4 years, heard her make the sound she made that night. It wasn't barking. It wasn't even really whimpering. It was something between a shriek and a moan, and she had both paws up on the passenger window, her nails dragging the glass, and she was staring out into the dark at something I hadn't seen yet. I slowed down. Maybe 55-50. That's when I saw the shape at the edge of my headlights. It was moving alongside the road, not on the shoulder, but just past it, where the scrub brush starts. And it was keeping pace with me. I told myself, dear coyote. Trick of the lights and a tired brain at 2 a.m. I told myself that for about 4 seconds, which is exactly how long it took me to realize that whatever I was looking at was running upright. Not hunched. Not loping on 4 legs the way a big animal does. Upright. 2 legs. Arms. Or what looked like arms, pulled tight against its body. Head forward. Moving with this horrible mechanical efficiency. Like the way a sprinting human looks when you slow the footage down. Too smooth. Too even. I hit the gas. Brought it up to 70. It kept pace. I want you to understand something about what I drive. A loaded refrigerated trailer runs close to 78,000 pounds gross. To get that up to 70 miles per hour on flat desert takes real engine. Whatever was outside my window, whatever that shape was, it matched me without any visible effort. No change in gait. No pulling ahead, no falling behind. Just pace. Perfect, horrible pace. Cass had gone completely silent, which was almost worse than the screaming. She was backed against the center console, pressed flat like she was trying to disappear into the seat. Her eyes were locked on something I couldn't see anymore because I was looking at the road, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to remember if there was a rest stop in the next 10 miles or if I was alone out here for another 40. I grabbed my phone. No signal. That stretch of 491 goes dead for about 15 miles through the Navajo Nation, and I was right in the middle of it. I thought about something my grandfather told me when I was a kid. He was Dine Navajo, from the Coyote Pass clan. He didn't talk much about certain things. There were words he wouldn't say, not even in passing. But once, just once, when I was maybe 9 or 10 and asking too many questions about things kids shouldn't ask about, he looked at me very seriously and said, "If something keeps up with you out there in the dark, don't look at it. And whatever you do, do not let it see your face." I had my eyes fixed straight ahead. The shape was still in my peripheral vision. At mile marker 71, it moved closer to the road. I only know the exact marker because I was watching for them obsessively by that point, counting them like a prayer. 68, 69, 70. Each one meant I was closer to the intersection at Sheep Springs where there'd be light, maybe another vehicle, something human and real. When it moved closer, I saw it properly for the first time. The headlights caught it for maybe 2 full seconds. It was tall, taller than it had looked at a distance. 7 feet, maybe more, though it was hard to judge from inside the cab. Its skin, if that's what it was, looked wrong. Not the color of a person. Not the color of an animal. Something gray-brown and dry, like cracked mud after a long summer. It was thin in a way that made my stomach turn, limbs too long, joints bending at angles that didn't make anatomical sense. And it was wearing something. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Around its shoulders, draped and hanging, was what looked like an animal hide. Coyote, maybe, or dog, I couldn't tell. The fur was dark and matted and it hung wrong, the way a coat hangs on a wire hanger instead of a body. Then it turned its head toward me, and it smiled. That smile had too many teeth, and every single one of them was pointed in the wrong direction. I floored it. 80, 85, 90 miles an hour with a full load on a 2-lane desert highway in the middle of the night, which is something I have never done before and hope to God I never do again. The trailer was swaying. Cass slid off the seat. I didn't care. I was watching the road and the mirrors and the road again, and trying not to think about what I'd just seen. At mile marker 73, the shape was gone. Just gone. Not fallen behind, gone. 1 second it was there at the edge of the headlights, and then it wasn't, like something had simply switched it off. I didn't slow down until I hit the lights at Sheep Springs. I pulled into the gravel lot outside a closed trading post, put the truck in park, and sat there shaking for 25 minutes. Cass crawled into my lap, all 42 pounds of her, and pressed her face against my chest. She was trembling. Either of us slept. I filed a trip report when I reached Farmington. I didn't mention what I'd seen, obviously. I said I'd had a near miss with a deer and needed to document the stress event. My dispatcher, a guy named Marcus who's been in trucking longer than I've been alive, called me himself 2 hours later. He asked if I'd been on 491 that night. I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Were you on it between mile markers 60 and 75? I asked him why he was asking. "Because," he said, "you're the 3rd driver this month who's called in a stress event from that exact stretch." He wouldn't tell me what the others had reported. I asked 3 more times over the next week and he kept changing the subject. Eventually I stopped asking. Here's the part that keeps me up at night though. And I mean that literally. I'm writing this at 3 a.m. because I cannot sleep, and because I need someone else to know this in case something happens. When I got home the morning after the haul, I went through my dashcam footage. The camera faces forward, out the windshield. It doesn't cover the sides. I knew that. But I'd bought a second camera unit about 6 months back, a little wide-angle clip-on that I'd mounted up on the passenger's side mirror housing to help with lane changes. I'd honestly forgotten it was there. I checked that footage. For 41 seconds, between mile markers 68 and 71, there is something visible at the right edge of the frame. Running. Keeping pace. The image quality isn't great. It's a cheap camera, night vision in the infrared, everything washed out and grainy. But you can see the shape. Upright. Long-limbed. Moving beside the truck. And at the 41st second, just before it moves out of frame, it turns. You can't see the smile. The resolution isn't good enough for that. But you can see it turn toward the camera. And you can see that its face, what should be its face, is wrong. Not wrong the way an animal's face is wrong when you see it in the dark and your brain hasn't processed it yet. Wrong the way a mask is wrong. Wrong the way something looks when it's wearing a shape that doesn't belong to it. I've shown the footage to 4 people. My wife. My brother-in-law, who does wildlife biology for the state. A trucker friend of mine named Dell who's done that same route for 15 years. And 1 other person, a woman I found through an online forum who studies indigenous folklore of the Southwest, who asked me not to use her name. My wife said it was an animal and the camera distorted it. She said this while holding my hand very tightly and not meeting my eyes. My brother-in-law watched it twice, said nothing, and then asked me if I'd ever considered switching to daytime hauls. Del went quiet in a way I've never seen Del go quiet before. He's not a quiet man. After about a minute he told me he'd heard stories from some of the Navajo drivers who work that corridor. He said there are routes some of them won't take at night anymore. He said there are things you're not supposed to talk about out loud, especially not by name. He said, "I think you should delete that footage." I haven't deleted it. I've saved it in 3 places. 1 copy on a thumb drive at my house, 1 copy uploaded to a private folder my wife can access if something happens to me, and 1 copy at a location I'm not going to share publicly. The file name is NM491OCT14CM2mirror.mp4 if that means anything to anyone. The woman who studies folklore was the only one who didn't look scared when I showed her. She just looked tired. She told me that what I was describing, the speed, the height it was wearing, the way it turned and looked, fit a pattern that goes back centuries in oral tradition. She told me there are reasons the roads through that part of the country were not originally meant to be traveled at night. That the land has its own logic, its own rules, and that those rules predate every highway and mile marker and way station by 1,000 years. She told me that the ones who have encounters like mine fall into 2 categories. The ones who are never bothered again, and the ones who start noticing things closer to home. That conversation was 11 months ago. For the first 7 months, nothing. I drove different routes. Took mostly daytime loads. Slept fine mostly. Started to wonder if I'd overreacted. Started to let myself believe that maybe it had been an animal, some trick of darkness and exhaustion and a tired brain on a long, empty road. Then, 6 weeks ago, Cass started doing it again. Not on the road. At home. Our house is in a rural area outside of Grants, New Mexico. About 3 acres, low scrub, a few juniper trees at the edge of the property. Quiet. I've loved that quiet for 15 years. Cass started waking me up at night. Standing at the bedroom window. Paws on the sill. Making that same sound. That sound between a shriek and a moan that I'd only ever heard once before, at mile marker 62, on a road I've tried very hard to forget. I got up the first time. Looked out the window. Saw nothing. Told myself it was a coyote. Told myself the smell, this dry, animal smell, like something long dead left in the sun, was just the wind off the desert. The second time I got up, I turned on the exterior light. There were footprints in the dirt along the tree line. 2-footed. Long stride. Deeper at the toe than the heel, like whatever made them was leaning forward. Moving fast. They led to the edge of the property and stopped. Just stopped. No road. No brush trail. No disturbed ground in any direction. Just a line of prints that ended at the fence line as if whatever had made them had simply stepped out of the world. I measured the stride that night with a tape measure. I don't know why, instinct I guess. Or maybe some part of me needed a fact to hold on to. 81 inches between steps. I haven't told my wife about the footprints. I haven't told Delaware. The only person I've told is the folklore woman, and she hasn't responded to my last 3 messages. That was 2 weeks ago. Last night, Cass woke me up again. This time I didn't look out the window. Because this time, before I even got out of bed, I heard something that stopped me cold. Something that came from outside, from the tree line, from the dark past the fence where the footprints ended. Something that sounded exactly like my name. In my grandfather's voice. My grandfather has been dead for 11 years. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it followed me home or if it was already here, waiting. What I know is this. There are things in the dark of the American Southwest that the maps don't mark and the road signs don't warn you about. And once one of them looks at you, really looks at you, I don't think they forget. Has anyone else driven that stretch of US 491 at night? Has anyone else heard something you couldn't explain call your name in a voice that shouldn't exist anymore? Tell me I'm not alone in this. My supervisor told me to write it up as a bear attack. There was no bear. I have worked in the outdoors for 22 years and I know what a bear attack looks like. I know what bear prints look like, what claw marks look like, what the smell is, that heavy, iron and musk smell that clings to everything a bear has touched. I know what it looks like when a bear has been through a campsite. What I found at Campsite 7 on the night of August 9th, 2009, was not a bear attack. I'm writing this now because I'm retired. Because my supervisor is dead, heart attack 2 years ago, and because I've been carrying this for 15 years and I think it's starting to cost me something I can't afford to keep paying. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I worked as a ranger for the Navajo Nation Department of Fish and Wildlife for 12 years, stationed out of a small field office near Sheep Springs, New Mexico. I covered a territory of roughly 400 square miles, canyonland, mesa, scrub desert, stretches of road that don't appear on most maps. It was quiet work mostly. Citation writing. Fence repair. The occasional lost hiker. In 12 years, I filed 1,847 incident reports. Report number 1,848 was the one they made me destroy. The call came in at 11:52 p.m. on a Tuesday. A camper, a man named Gerald Sosi, visiting from Albuquerque with his teenage son, had called the emergency line saying he could hear something moving around the perimeter of their site. He said it had been circling for almost an hour. He said it was big. I took the call myself. Gerald's voice was steady enough, but I could hear his son in the background, asking questions Gerald wasn't answering. That's the thing that made me move fast, not what Gerald said, but what he wasn't saying to his kid. I drove out to Campsite 7. It's about 14 miles off the main road, down a 2-track that cuts through a dry wash and comes out on a flat bench above a canyon. No cell service. No other campers within 3 miles that night. I got there at 12:31 a.m. Gerald and his son were in their truck. Engine running. Every light on, headlights, interior lights, the little cargo lamp above the bed. The tent was still standing, but Gerald had clearly left it in a hurry. One of the tent poles was bent. A camp chair was tipped over. Gerald rolled his window down maybe 2 inches when I pulled up. He said, "Did you see it on the road coming in?" I told him I hadn't seen anything. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It was walking toward the road about 10 minutes ago. Moving fast." He paused. "It was walking like a man." I want to be honest about what I thought in that moment. I thought drunk camper, trick of the dark, coyote or javelina that spooked him. I thought, this is going to be a 40-minute drive each way for a story about shadows. I was tired. It was almost 1 a.m. I'd been on shift since 7 the previous morning. I took my flashlight and did a perimeter walk of the campsite while Gerald watched from the truck. The ground around Campsite 7 is a mixture of hard-packed clay and loose sand, the kind of surface that holds prints well. I was looking for tracks. I found them within about 30 seconds. They were human footprints. Bare feet. Adult-sized, male, based on the length. They came out of the darkness to the north, moved in a wide arc around the entire campsite. I followed them all the way around, counting, and then moved back toward the north. Toward the canyon edge. I almost wrote it off. Almost. Hikers sometimes came through. It was unusual this late, on this terrain, barefoot, but not impossible. Then I measured the stride. My stride, when I walk normally, is about 30 inches. When I jog, maybe 40. When I sprint, maybe 50, 55 at the absolute outside. The prints were 78 inches apart. 6.5 feet between each step. Whatever had made them hadn't been walking. I went back to the truck and told Gerald I was going to follow the tracks north toward the canyon, and that I wanted him to stay in the vehicle with the engine on. Gerald looked at me for a long moment. His son, maybe 16, 17, was watching me from the passenger seat. Gerald said very quietly, "Ranger, I grew up on this land. My grandfather was born 6 miles from here." He stopped. "Please don't follow those tracks." I asked him why. He didn't answer directly. He said, "There are things out here that notice when you pay attention to them." I thought about that sentence for a long time driving home that night. I've thought about it almost every day since. I followed the tracks anyway. They led north for about 200 yards, angling toward the canyon rim. The terrain got rougher, loose shale, bigger rocks, no more sand to hold prints. I lost the trail near a cluster of juniper trees about 40 feet from the edge. I stopped there. Swept my light around. Nothing. Then the smell hit me. Not animal. Not decay. Something chemical sweet underneath a layer of something animal and wrong, like the smell inside a place where something has been sick for a long time. It came from the trees to my left, and it came fast, like a door opening. I turned my light toward the trees. I don't know how else to describe it. It was my height. My build. It was wearing what I was wearing, the uniform, the jacket, the hat. Everything correct. Everything exact. It stood the way I stand when I'm not thinking about it, weight on the left leg, right shoulder slightly lower. And its face, from 15 feet away in a flashlight beam, its face was mine. I didn't scream. I want to say I was brave, but the truth is I think my body just forgot how. Everything stopped. My lungs, my legs, my voice. Every system in me went completely offline for what felt like a very long time. Then it tilted its head. Like a dog hearing a sound. The movement was slow and curious, and it went too far. The head kept going, past the point a human neck allows, and stopped at an angle that made my spine go cold in a way I still feel sometimes when the weather changes. I ran. I'm not ashamed of that. I ran back toward the campsite, and I did not look behind me, and I did not stop until I hit the light from Gerald's truck. I got in my vehicle. I drove Gerald and his son out to the main road, following them in my truck the whole 14 miles, and I didn't stop shaking until I hit the lights of Sheep Springs. I filed a preliminary incident report the next morning. I wrote exactly what I saw. Tracks measurements. The figure in the trees. My supervisor called me into his office at 3 p.m. He told me to rewrite it as a bear encounter. He told me the original would be shredded. He told me this very calmly, the way you tell someone to do something that has already been decided. I asked him if this had happened before. He looked at the wall behind me and said, "You're not the first ranger to come out of that area with a report like this. You won't be the last." I asked him what it was. He said, "It's something that the land here has always had. And it is not our place to document it." That was 2009. I stayed on for another 7 years. I never went to Campsite 7 again. I requested it be taken off my rotation, and my supervisor approved the request without asking why. In those 7 years, I heard 2 other rangers mention things they'd seen at night in the Northern Territory, things they described in careful, sideways language, the way you talk about something when you're not sure saying the name out loud is safe. I never pressed them. They never pressed me. When I retired in 2016, the outgoing supervisor, my original one had moved to a desk job in Window Rock by then, handed me a packet of exit paperwork. Standard stuff. Non-disclosure agreements about ongoing cases, about resource locations, about certain canyon sites that were under cultural protection. Page 11 of the NDA packet referenced, in dry legal language, a category of incident classified internally as Appendix R, Unclassified Encounter Events. It said rangers were prohibited from publicly disclosing details of any appendix or incident for a period of not less than 15 years following separation from service. My 15 years ended 8 months ago. I went back to Sheep Springs last spring. Not to the campsite, I'm not that brave, or maybe not that stupid. Just to the town. I stopped at the gas station. Bought a coffee. Talked to a woman behind the counter who'd lived there her whole life. I didn't ask her about what I'd seen. But somehow the conversation drifted, the way conversations do in small places where everyone knows the shape of certain silences. She said, "You were a ranger out here?" I said yes. She nodded slowly. "You work up north? The Canyon Territory?" I said yes. She looked at me for a long moment. Not scared. Not dramatic. Just tired, the way people look when they've known something their whole lives that they've never been able to explain. She said, It's been busy up there lately. I asked what she meant. She said, people keep seeing a ranger. Walking the roads at night. Uniform and everything. She poured my coffee. Only thing is, nobody's been stationed up there since 2016. I drove home in 4 hours and I don't remember most of it. I've been thinking about what she said ever since. Something is still walking those roads. In my uniform. With my face. And I don't know if it's been doing that since 2009, or if it stopped for a while and recently started again. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's the same thing every time or something that just learned a shape and kept it. What I know is that Appendix R exists. Incident File NWN 2009 R0047 exists, or existed, before it was shredded. And there are at least 6 other rangers who worked that Northern Territory between 2001 and 2016. If any of you are reading this, you know what I'm talking about. And you know why I didn't use my real name. Has anyone else seen something that looked exactly like someone they know, in a place that person couldn't possibly be? My daughter is 8 years old, and she has started drawing the same face every night before bed. I didn't notice at first. Kids draw. Mara has always drawn horses, mostly, and the occasional lopsided dog that looks more like a being with legs. I'd find her sketchbooks all over the house, tucked under couch cushions and left open on the kitchen table, pages and pages of ordinary 8-year-old art. But starting in November, the horses stopped. The face started. I can't describe it to you in a way that will make you feel what I feel when I look at those drawings. I've tried explaining it to my husband, and I can see the moment his face shifts from concern into the particular gentleness people use when they've decided you're being irrational. So let me just tell you the facts. The face in every drawing is tall. Elongated. The proportions are wrong in a way that Mara shouldn't be able to articulate, because she's 8, and she doesn't know the word. Proportions. The eyes are too wide and too far apart, and they are always, in every single drawing, across 43 pages I've counted, looking slightly to the left. Not at the viewer. Just past them. At something the viewer can't see. Mara calls it the tall neighbor. She says it lives past the east fence. She says it's been watching us since before I was born. I need to tell you about the ranch first, because the ranch is the whole story. My family has run cattle on 2,200 acres of high desert in San Juan County, Utah since 1961. My grandfather homesteaded it. My father grew up on it. I grew up on it. My daughter is growing up on it now, in the same house, with the same creak in the third porch step and the same smell of sage and iron dust that I remember from being small. It is a beautiful, hard, isolated place. The nearest neighbor is 11 miles down a dirt road. The nearest town is 34 miles. In winter, when the road ices and the sky comes down low and gray, you can go 3-4 days without seeing another human being outside your own family. I say this not to set a mood. I say it because isolation matters to this story. Because things can happen in isolated places that never get reported, never get investigated, never get added to any record anywhere. Because in isolated places, the rules that hold in towns, the rules about what is and isn't possible, about what does and doesn't exist, those rules get thin. My grandmother knew this. She had 2 rules that were absolute, unchallengeable, and passed down with the specific weight of things that came from experience rather than superstition. The first, never leave food outside after dark. The second, never count the cattle after sundown. She never explained either one. If you asked her why, she'd look at you the way she looked at the horizon when weather was coming, a long, measuring look, and she'd say, "Because something out there counts with you." I thought it was old woman nonsense for 30 years. Then last October my daughter climbed the east fence at dusk to count the cattle. I didn't know she'd done it until the next morning. Mara told me over breakfast, the way kids tell you things, casually, between bites of cereal, like it was nothing. She said, "Mom, I counted the cows last night but I kept losing track because the tall neighbor kept moving between them." I put down my coffee. I asked her what she meant. She said, He walks between them real slow so they don't get scared. But it makes it hard to count because he's so tall you think he's a cow at first, and then he stands up. She said this the way she'd say the sky is blue or the barn cat had kittens. Factual. Untroubled. I asked her what the tall neighbor looked like. She thought about it seriously, the way she thinks about things. Skinny, she said. Like if you stretched a person. And he doesn't have a good face yet. She paused. He said he's working on it. I went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I asked her, he talked to you? She looked at me like I'd asked something obvious. He talks to all of us, she said. He talked to great-grandma Ruth too. He told me. My grandmother Ruth died in 1987. Mara was born in 2015. They never met. There is no photograph of Ruth in this house. I have one, in a box in storage in town. I have never described her to my daughter. I have never said her name in front of my daughter. What did he tell you about great-grandma Ruth? I asked. Mara said. He said she was the one who taught him how your family smells. I called my father that afternoon. Dad is 71. He grew up on this ranch. He left at 19, came back at 32, and has been here since. He is not a superstitious man. He is not a man who talks about feelings or fears or things he can't explain. He is a man who fixes fences and watches weather and speaks in short sentences about practical things. I told him what Mara had said. All of it. The tall neighbor. The cattle. Ruth's name. There was a silence on the phone that lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then my father said, "How close did she get to the east fence?" I told him she'd climbed it. Another silence. He said, "I'm coming up." He drove 3 hours from Monticello. He arrived at 6 p.m. He didn't come inside right away. He walked the east fence line first, all the way from the north corner to the canyon drop at the south end, about half a mile total. I watched him from the kitchen window. He walked slowly, looking at the ground. When he came in, he sat down at the kitchen table, and he told me something he had never told me before. He said that when he was 11 years old, he'd seen something at the east fence at dusk. He'd been bringing in a stray calf. He'd heard a sound from the other side of the fence. He described it as a sound like a person imitating a cow, but not quite right, and he'd looked up and seen something tall standing in the scrub about 30 yards out. He said it had been watching the cattle. He said that when it saw him notice it, it tilted its head. He demonstrated, tilting his own head at an angle that made my stomach clench, and then it turned and walked away into the dark. He said his mother, Ruth, had found him at the fence 20 minutes later, still standing there. She hadn't asked what he'd seen. She'd just taken his hand, walked him inside, and that night at dinner she told him the 2 rules for the first time. Never leave food out after dark. Never count the cattle after sundown. My father looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "I thought she made those rules because of me. Because of what I saw." He paused. But she already knew the rules before that night. She'd known them her whole life. Something has been on this land longer than my family has. And my family has been here since 1961. I don't want to think about how long that thing has been watching, learning our faces, learning how we smell, waiting, with the patience of something that does not measure time the way we do. My father stayed 4 days. On the second night, the dogs, we have 3, 2 border collies and an old blue heeler, refused to go outside after 9 p.m. All 3 of them planted themselves at the back door and would not move. Not for food. Not for their names. They just sat there, pressed together, facing the door, and whined in a way I'd never heard before. Low and continuous, like machinery running wrong. On the 3rd night, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 2 a.m. and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the east pasture. The cattle were moving. Not panicked, not the way they move when there's a predator. Slow. Shifting. A kind of uneasy drift that I've seen before when they sense weather coming, or when something has passed through the area and left a scent. I watched for about 10 minutes. Then I saw it. out past the east fence, where the scrub brush thickens before the drop into the canyon. A shape. Upright. Still. Darker than the dark around it, which doesn't make sense, but that's how it looked, like the darkness had decided to stand up and take a form. It was tall. Even at that distance, even in the dark, I could tell it was wrong tall. Too much of it above the fence line. I did not turn on the outside light. I did not go outside. I stood at that window for what I later measured was 47 minutes, watching that shape stand motionless at the tree line. At 2:51 a.m. it moved. Not quickly, not the way you'd run or flee. It simply turned and walked slowly, back into the canyon dark. The cattle settled within minutes. I went to check on Mara. She was asleep. She'd kicked her covers half off, the way she does. Her sketchbook was open on the nightstand. The page it was open to showed the east fence, the pasture, the dark beyond the fence line, and a tall shape, standing at the tree line, looking toward the house. My father went home on the fourth day. Before he left, he walked the east fence one more time. When he came back, he told me he'd found something he thought I should know about. Along a 40-foot stretch of the fence on the inside, our side, the ground was disturbed. Not dug up. Not trampled. Pressed. Like something heavy had stood in several places, shifting weight, over a long period of time. The impressions were 2-footed. The stride, where he could measure it in softer ground, was between 72 and 80 inches. On the fence wire itself, at several points there were marks. Not claw marks. Something more deliberate. My father photographed them and sent the photos to a friend of his who does archaeology for the state. His friend called back the same evening. He said the marks weren't tool marks and weren't animal. He said the pattern reminded him of something he'd seen on certain canyon walls in the area, markings that the Dayan considered warnings. Territory markers, in a sense, but not the kind that said this is mine. The kind that said I know you're here. My father texted me after the call. Move the cattle out of the east pasture. Don't let Mara near that fence. That was 6 months ago. The cattle are in the west pasture now. The east fence is locked. Mara still draws the face. Less often than before, maybe once or twice a week now instead of every night. When I ask her about the tall neighbor, she shrugs and says he's busy. I asked her once, carefully, if she was scared of him. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "No. He says he's known our family forever. He says we're his favorite ones to watch." She picked up her pencil. "He says when I'm old he's going to learn my face so he can keep me here even after I'm gone." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I took the sketchbook. I photographed every page. All 43 drawings. I uploaded them to a private folder, file name Mara Drawings NOV 2023 APR 2024, because I needed them to exist somewhere outside this house, somewhere that isn't isolated, somewhere that someone else might eventually see. If you are reading this and you have seen this face before, the elongated proportions, the eyes looking just past you, the wrong smile, I need you to tell me. Because I grew up on this land. I know every rock and fence post and dry wash on 2,200 acres. And last week, for the first time in my life, I found a section of the east fence where the wire had been pushed inward. From the outside. Something has been on this property longer than my family. It knows our faces. It knew my grandmother's name. It is teaching itself my daughter's face right now, and my daughter thinks it's a neighbor. Has anyone else inherited something like this? A family land, a family rule, a thing that your grandparents warned you about without ever explaining why. I need to know if this happens to other people, or if my family has always been the only ones.